here, and then here. There it goes. Hello, party people, and welcome to another episode of Office Hours, the webcast where I take your SQL Server and Microsoft Data Platform questions, whichever ones you highly voted over on PollGab, and then I kind of dance around the answers, I suppose. Let's see, the highest voted question right now is from Mert, who says, "Hi Brent, what's the relationship between an always-on availability always-on availability group, and a failover cluster?" The problem with answering this question is that it changes in like the last three versions of SQL Server. There are changes around Linux. There are changes around scale-out availability groups. There are changes around basic availability groups. So, unfortunately, this isn't something that I can give you a 30-second answer on without also being tied to the specific version that you're running. The good news is that it's really well documented in the documentation. So, hop over to learn.microsoft.com, pull open the documentation for the version of SQL Server that you're using, and then go from there. Next up, LemonOnAPear says, "What's your favorite SQL Server bug or a story about a bug?" Oh, that is a really tough question. The first one, the biggest one that comes to mind, was around 2012, SQL Server 2012. Whenever you rebuilt an index, they reset all the usage statistics for that, and they called it a feature. They said, here you go, it's a feature. And then everybody was screaming and saying, "No, you can't do that. We don't know which indexes are useful because we rebuild our indexes every night." And so then after, like a few service packs or something, they ended up rolling that back and saying, "Okay, sorry, that turns out that was a bug, not a feature." Probably the ones that I run into all the times are in execution plans, things around nested loops. Under nested loops, the number of estimated rows that'll come back is ridiculously way off, and it's been off for like 20 years. But it's kind of frustrating that there's so many bugs around execution plans. If you want to see really about problems with bugs, go to feedback.azure.com. That's where people can file bug reports, and Microsoft just kind of ignores them. Next up, we have Frank Lambo says, "Do you have any plans to do your training classes on pluralsight?" Nope, never, absolutely not. Look at the price for pluralsight, and then look at the price for my training courses. Why would I want to take a small portion of what you pay pluralsight as opposed to me just selling it directly? I think my classes are really good, and I don't want to sell them for like $10. That's just me. Next up, we have Me Ishmael says, "Enforcing relational integrity versus doing foreign keys is often a source of friction between app devs and production DBAs. There are blogs that offer alternatives. What is your opinion?" I think in every brand new application being built from scratch, you should have foreign keys in, because that's the time when the application is the most buggy and the most likely to insert bad data. However, don't be surprised if over time, if you hit massive scale, that you have to remove foreign keys due to the overhead of enforcing them. If you're dealing with an application that's already out there in the live, putting in foreign keys is usually not a great solution to performance problems. So there you go. There's my 60-second answer version of it. I go into much more details in my Mastering Index Tuning class, where we have a whole module around foreign keys, check constraints, unique constraints. I explain the pros and cons. I demo them to show the performance overhead. Next up, we have Don, who says, "I've taken your Fundamentals of Columnstore course. My question is for Azure Synapse Analytics. Does it have the same problems that the SQL Server engine does with Columnstore?" I have no idea. I don't know anything about Azure Synapse Analytics these days. It had such a fast change rate for several years that I kept looking at it. Every time I would look at it, it was wearing a different costume. I'm like, Parallel data warehouse, PDW, they would call it, there were like 16 different names for the thing over the last 5 years, and they kept changing the technology. Data Allegro when they first bought it, Azure SQL DW, they're just, oh my gosh. And so it just eventually got to the point where I'm like, when you stop changing your clothes every time I look at you on a Zoom call, then maybe I can take you seriously and look at how you work. But otherwise, I just don't have the time for that product. Next up, Tired and Frustrated says, we have a lot of ad hoc queries in the plan cache. What's better, optimize for ad hoc or forced parameterization? I go into details on that in my Mastering Server Tuning class. If you go to the Mastering Server Tuning class and open the module on plan cache problems, we spend about half an hour on there explaining what the problem is and the different ways that you can solve it and the gotchas with both of those features. To me, optimize for ad hoc is worthless, and forced parameterization is a much better solution. But just remember that when you turn that on, you're also turning on parameter sniffing, which causes its own set of problems. Next up, let's see here. We have why do perfmon counters, so this is from Flynders, why do perfmon counters give me different results than a SQL Server DMV? I'll give you one worse than that. I'll expand on your question. When you take these numbers and you go to your storage person and you say, hey, storage person, how come my latency numbers are so bad? They're going to give you a completely different set of numbers, and none of those numbers are ever going to match. What you want to do is just step back instead and say, does this server have a problem reading or writing from storage? To find that out, what you do is you look at weight statistics to figure out if storage weights are amongst the top out of your weight stats. Then, if your server is having storage weight stat problems, whatever metrics you're getting aren't good enough. And it just doesn't really matter what they are. Now, one way that you could try to solve those is by going to your storage admin or tweaking the number your config on your storage. But changing configurations on storage or buying faster storage is often very risky and expensive. What you probably want to do instead is look at the queries that are having those storage problems and figure out if you can either tune those queries or tune the indexes on the underlying tables so that you don't end up having to scan large portions of tables in order to satisfy those queries. And we'll do one more. Let's see here. We'll do, Philip says, what do you typically like when you see comments inside of code, like stored procedures? What kind of comments are you looking for? Never tell me what the code does. I can see what the code does by reading it. Tell me why you're doing it. I wish that at the beginning of every stored procedure, every function, every trigger, that someone would write a little thing about, hey, here's why we're embarking on this journey together, and give me a link to the GitHub issue, Jira issue, whatever, that spawned the creation of this code. Then, as we go through the code, tell me why each piece of code exists. If you can't tell me why it's there, it needs to be gone. Let's yank it out. Now, I need to get the configuration values so that I know the current state we're in. Just give me a quick why we're doing this. Don't tell me what we're doing. Because when I'm in a trigger, yeah, I can see that the trigger is deleting things from other tables or updating product state to Texas, whatever it is. I want to know why you're doing it so that if I start ripping out code, I understand what the ramifications are going to be. All right, so there we go. There's a quick round of answers. Thanks for hanging out with me at office hours, and I will see y'all next time. Adios.